Another bit of bad practice is that when one of the boys who was doing the test wanted to pull out, the researcher insisted that he carried on with the test and started to insult the boy to try and force him to carry on. This means not only did the researcher deny the participant's right to withdraw, but also psychologically abused the participant to try and force him to carry on, which shows that the researcher isn't complying to their responsibility as researcher to ensure that no harm, psychological or physical, comes to the participant during the testing. The researcher's responsibilities during research also include anticipating any ethical issues that could occur during the research before anything takes place, monitoring the participants and equipment during the research to ensure these issues don't occur, as well as making sure the participants are safe, and finally ensuring that any data collected stays protected and confidential. This could have many consequences to not only the participant but also the researcher. This is because the participant would experience psychological damage and possibly social harm as they had insults thrown at them by a leading figure who they felt they should have been able to trust. So they may not want to do any more research again, as they feel like they can't trust the researchers. Alongside this, because the abuse they received was in front of people in the class, they may feel embarrassed in front of them and could possibly be bullied by their peers for doing something wrong and getting shouted at by the researcher. This could lead to the parents being angry at the researcher and organisation that was carrying out the research, and so could file a complaint, which may lead to the organisation suspending or terminating your job and placing you in ethical training to learn about the responsibilities they have as a researcher, to respect the participant and ensure no harm comes to them during the research. Furthermore, they may lose their BASIS accreditation, if they have one, which is the professional standard awarded to those who are good researchers and stick to all of the rules which they're meant to, which could lead to getting less work. Finally, the fact that they have caused psychological harm to a child who is volunteering to help them in their research may cause the researcher psychological harm, as they felt guilty for what they have done. Instead of doing this, the researcher should have allowed the boy to stop without using insults as a way to try and force him to carry on and check to make sure he was okay. Another form of bad practice is the participant ended up injuring themselves, but the researcher didn't know where the nearest first aid kit or the nearest first aider was, so he instead told participants to run it underwater. This is poor practice because researchers have a duty to follow a set of guidelines to ensure that any participants and researchers who are working with them are safe. For example, they should know where the nearest first aid kit and first aider are, as well as the nearest fire exits, etc. Therefore, to ensure this doesn't happen again, the researcher must ensure that before they do any research, they follow all the guidelines and make sure they know where things such as the nearest first aid kit is, so that they're able to find it and use it if they have to. By not knowing where the first aid kit was and telling the participants to just run it underwater, there could be many consequences to the participant as well as the researcher. For example, the participant could have a lot more physical harm to them if the injury they have isn't treated properly, as it won't heal and could be antagonised easily without the correct treatment. Furthermore, the researcher may be suspended from their work if they haven't treated a participant correctly, and may be told that they have to go undergo training to relearn the health and safety procedures they have to follow. These procedures are things such as ensuring they know where their nearest first aid kit is and how to do first aid, as well as ensuring that all equipment is safe before using it, in which case they haven't followed, they don't know where the first aid kit is, and so just told them to run it underwater instead. And finally, they may be terminated from their job if the HSE, a health and safety executive, which is the executive responsible for enforcing and regulating all of the health and safety protocols throughout Great Britain, such as introducing the 5-step approach for doing a risk assessment prior to any testing taking place, look into the incident and decide that the researcher isn't fit to carry out any more research considering the mistakes they've made and the outcome of their mistakes. Furthermore, this shows another part of poor practice that was in place during the research, as the researcher hasn't complied with the laboratory safety rules procedures. These procedures are things that should be done in the laboratory or place of testing that ensure everything is safe and working to ensure the full safety of the participants. For example, this could be putting mats down behind treadmills so if they fall off the treadmill, then they don't fall straight onto the hard floor, where injury would be more likely. And could also be that when you are doing research where the participant is on a treadmill, such as in this case with the VO2 max test, and the client should be clipped onto the treadmill by the emergency stop cord, which means that if the participant did slip over, the treadmill would be stopped by this cord being pulled. Another example of poor practice is that the researcher reduced the amount of time that the participant would have for their warm-up, so that the researcher could try and get as many of the participants through the testing as possible. Alongside this, the researcher also prioritised getting the better boys out of the group of participants to carry out the test first, which shows two parts of poor practice. This is because by reducing the amount of time for the participants to warm up and prepare for the test, it could mean they are more likely to injure themselves during the test as they aren't fully prepared, and so their muscles won't be ready for the high level of intensity they will be taking part in during the testing. This is bad practice because as a researcher, they have to ensure that the participant the participants are prepared for the activity, so they are less susceptible to getting injured while doing the test. But also during this preparation, the researchers should have allowed for the participants to familiarise themselves with the equipment that they are using, so that when they do the actual test, they would not only perform their best but also be comfortable while doing it. Furthermore, by prioritising the better boys out of the groups to do the testing, it shows very little equality and impartiality, which is a rule that researchers must follow that states that any decisions that a researcher makes must be objective and made with no bias included. So in this case, the researcher should have picked the participants randomly rather than based on ability. It could cause psychological damage to the participants who weren't chosen, as they will start to believe they aren't as good as the other people who are there with them. This could lead to consequences coming to the researcher, as they may start to feel guilty if they've caused someone psychological or physical harm, and could possibly be suspended or terminated from their job, as they haven't followed the rules they are told to do so. The way the researcher could avoid these things happening is by ensuring that the participants were given enough time to fully prepare themselves during the warm-up for the testing they would be taking, so they would be less likely to be injured. The researcher also should have ensured that they were fair when they were picking the participants to do the test, as not only would this then avoid there being any psychological damage to the participants, as they were being picked randomly rather than based on ability, but it would also ensure that the results are fair, as they won't only be the results of participants who have a far higher fitness level or ability. The researcher also didn't tell the participants that they would be doing the VO2 max test, so they could never disagree or agree to taking part in the test. This shows that the researcher has deceived the participants, as they omitted information from the consent form, which should be on there, as it is something they need to know that they are doing, so they can agree or disagree to doing it due to things such as health issues, etc. Deception by omission is when you lie or forget to tell the participants something that will be occurring, or the risks that something may involve during the research in the consent form. This can be done for many reasons, such as to ensure that participants put full effort in, as it may be a test to see how people perform when they don't know what is coming. However, this should always then be addressed in the debriefing. Therefore, this should have been included in the consent form that was sent out prior to the testing. By not doing this, it could cause psychological damage, as they may not be able to volunteer for things again, as they don't have the trust in the researchers to be able to do so. Furthermore, the researchers didn't do a debriefing either. A debriefing is a discussion that should take place at the end of the research to discuss the participants' experience and to complete their understanding of why and how they did, as well as the simpler factors like what they did, so they fully understand why they weren't told about it in the informed consent, and to ensure that everything is okay to them. Where they could have explained why they'd done the VO2 max test and why he didn't tell them they would be doing it prior to the test. However, because he didn't do this, it could cause further psychological damage to the participants, because they still don't know why or how they did even after they'd done everything. This could lead to the researcher being put through ethical training so they can learn the obligations they have to follow when doing any form of research, so that they carry everything out properly. Instead of doing this, the researchers should have included everything that participants would be doing in the informed consent. The researchers should have also done a debriefing at the end of the research, so the group knew what they had done and why. Finally, in the researcher's dissertation for his university report, they included someone else's data from a different test without sourcing whose it was, and so trying to pass it as their own. This is poor practice because plagiarism is an example of scientific misconduct, which could lead to multiple consequences for the researcher. For example, they could be served a formal reprimand or possibly even a suspension or termination of doing research for the university again. Instead of doing this, the researcher should have either not used the data that wasn't theirs, or just sourced the data they used to fill up their incomplete data from their own research. Scientific misconduct is defined as being any action which, deliberately or not, compromises the integrity of scientific research. Other examples could be, instead of plagiarizing data, the researcher makes up data to fill up any gaps that they have in their own research. Scenario 3. For this scenario, I've put that Brighton University have asked you to do a test on 14 to 17-year-old boys who play for the local school's football team to find out the peak anaerobic power output of the group. You have decided to do the anaerobic Wingate test. This test will be repeated twice for each candidate to get the average score and compare it with the rest of the group. Prior to the testing, you have been provided with ethical clearance to carry out the testing. You have also asked the group to complete a health screening questionnaire beforehand to ensure they are fit to undergo the test. Anyone who had health issues was asked to get a referral from their GP to ensure whether they could take part or not. During the first attempt at the test, one of the boys says he starts to feel lightheaded and doesn't want to continue as well as this. His heart rate rose to an unhealthy level, but you tell him it's fine and force everyone to continue and take part. Evaluation. One example of the good practice that was carried out by the researcher was that prior to carrying out the testing, the researcher ensured that he had got ethical clearance from the Institutional Ethics and Review Committee, which is the overall committee that carry things out, such as the risk-benefit analysis, to ensure that the researcher is fit to carry on. The risk-benefit analysis is the process of ensuring that any research that is carried out, the risk factor is proportionally less than that of the benefits that the researcher will give to humankind. Ethical clearance is a form of approval given to a researcher when a series of factors have been checked through by the committee and they all still guarantee full safety to the participant, researchers, and don't put the participants in harm's way. These factors are the title and purpose of the study, methodology, and participants to be included, how the participants will be informed of procedures, risks, and how they give consent, how confidentiality will be maintained, and finally the place of study. Furthermore, the researcher also ensured that all the participants had fully completed a health screening questionnaire. A health screening questionnaire is a consultation form that should be filled out with background information to the participant, as well as information about any health issues they previously or currently have, so the researcher can assess whether or not the participant is fit to take part in the testing. An example of some of the questions that could be in a health screening questionnaire could be if you have any previous or current mental health issues, or how many calories do you consume per day. If the researcher believes that there is a reason for them to not take part in the testing, they may ask the participant to get a subject disclaimer from their local GP. A subject disclaimer is when the GP gives permission to the participant to take part and the participant agrees to, but that if anything bad comes of it, then the researcher isn't responsible. However, one of the poor practices shown during the research was that during the testing, one of the boys who was taking part in their first attempt at the anaerobic Wingate said that he started to feel lightheaded, and alongside this, his heart rate started to rise to an unhealthy level, so he asked to stop. Despite this, his request was denied. This shows bad practice, as not only does the researcher deny the right to withdraw, but he also ignores the reasons for terminating a test, which states that research should be terminated if the participant is asked to do, or if there are any concerns to do with the health of the participant. Instead of doing this, the researcher should have terminated the test because of the request to withdraw from the test, but also because of the reasons for terminating, which were the increase in heart rate and the feeling of lightheadedness. By not doing so, there could be many consequences to not only the participant but also the researcher. For example, it could cause psychological damage because of the participant being forced to continue despite the fact that they feel as if they shouldn't continue due to their lightheadedness. Alongside this, the researcher may be terminated or suspended from their job because of the fact that they have denied the request to withdraw and ignore the reasons for terminating the test, and they could also be placed under supervision when and if they ever carry out any more research. Following this, the researcher then forced the other participants to take part anyway, even though they had voiced their concern and said they didn't want to take part, which means they were no longer volunteers to the research. This is poor practice because one of the points that the Institutional Ethics and Review Committee state is that anyone who is undertaking research must be volunteers, as otherwise they are being forced into it and to instead test subjects. This could have multiple consequences on the participant, as it may give them psychological damage, as they are being forced into doing things that they don't want to be doing. Furthermore, the researcher could face serious consequences, such as going to prison. This is because it is against the law to do research if the participants aren't volunteering, but are instead being used as test subjects against their will. It also means that the participants are no longer given their permission, which is needed before any research can take place, and is involved with the consent form, as participants have to give their permission before they can have tests run on them or take part in testing, which is usually gained through the process of informed consent. It's the example health screening questionnaire, which involves questions such as how many hours of exercise do you do per day, and things such as previous mental health issues and current mental health issues.